Hey guys, it's Fania here, and today I'm going to be talking to you about the top 5 things that you should add to your world building that are often overlooked. Now, I'll admit not all of these will be applicable in every situation. If you're writing historical fantasy, then some of these are going to be based upon historical fact, and if you're writing anything with non-human protagonists, then that's its own ballpark. That being said, these are just 5 things that if you add them to your world building, I think they add just that little bit of extra sparkle. They make the world feel a little bit more alive, and they're not always included. People tend to just kind of not give them much thought at all if they're even included. So with all that being said, let's get right into it. Number 1, prices. Including currency is pretty common in fantasy novels because we have been living in a capitalist-based society for several thousand years. But that being said, a lot of the time prices either aren't gone into great detail or I find they are really inconsistent. So I'm going to suggest a couple things here. One, figure out what your pricing breakdown is going to be. Whether you're just going to have simple, 1 copper coin is worth $1 and you're just going to keep it basic like that, or if you're going to do a system where 10 of one denomination is equal to 1 of another denomination. A good example of this in popular fiction is actually Harry Potter. J.K. Rowling based it upon the older system for British pounds, and it's just a very basic system once you know the math behind it. For the sake of your readers, I would suggest you do it so 10 coins equals 1 of the next denomination or something whole like that, as opposed to trying to make it more complicated, but that's just me. Once you have your money denominations determined, the next thing you're going to want to do is come up with 3 prices. And I'm going to tell you what these 3 prices should be because they're going to help you to scale prices throughout your novel so that whenever a character is buying anything, you will have a frame of reference for what this item should cost. So the first thing that you are going to come up with a price for is a loaf of bread or a bowl of rice, whatever their basic staple grain is that they would have with a meal, that you want to find a price for. If it's, how much does a loaf of bread cost from a bakery? How much does a sack of rice cost? Whatever it is, figure out the price for that because that is going to be your baseline price for easy, cheap, everyday accessible items. The second thing you're going to want to make a price for is the price of an average kitchen knife. And this might sound a little weird, but this is because throughout most of history, metal was a bit of a premium good. The better quality a knife, the more expensive it was. A knife is a basic tool for kitchens. Everybody's gonna need a knife unless all you're doing is stew, and even then you really do need a knife. Because of that, figure out how much a knife is gonna cost because every household is gonna need to buy a knife at some point, and it should be a little expensive but not so expensive that it would be out of the realm of possibility for the poorer households to afford. The third price you're going to want to include is the price of spending a night at an inn. This can be whatever the heck you want it to be. If you have a society where traveling isn't common, then it's probably going to be really expensive. If you have a society where almost everybody travels at some point, it's probably going to be a lot cheaper. But that's up to you. And this just kind of helps you figure out your sort of level of class disparity within your society, as well as it helps with a certain level of realism when it comes to people traveling to places. It also just helps you to keep consistent with it because if your price of an inn is always at least around the same mark, because it might be more expensive in a city versus the countryside or vice versa, then at least you are being consistent with what it is, and it will just kind of help flesh out your world building a bit more. Item number 2, festivals for the dead and funeral rites. This one might seem a little odd, but I'm going to explain why I think it should always be included in your world building. See, I studied anthropology, and one thing that is consistent throughout every society throughout all of human history is funeral rites of some kind. No matter what, if somebody dies, they are getting some sort of burial and send off. That is true going back thousands and thousands of years. And for all the periods that we have any sort of written documentation, there is also evidence of festivals for the dead. This is a key component of human society. So if you are writing anything with human characters, this will occur. So I want you to come up with one funeral rites. If it's cremation, are they getting entombed? Are you having a sky burial? I don't care what it is, but you need to come up with funeral rites. Just come up with the basic, how do they dispose of the bodies, and what do they do prior to disposing of the bodies? Do they gather around and share memories? Do they host a big feast? Do they host a wake? Pick whatever you want and just come up with a general funeral rites used by your culture. And then also make sure you have a festival for the dead. Again, you have full creativity with it. Maybe it involves visiting the tombs of their ancestors, maybe it involves cleaning the gravestones, maybe it involves having a picnic on the grave itself. Doesn't really matter. But the point is, there's always these rituals for the dead, and if you include it, it just kind of makes your world feel a little bit more alive, especially if you are writing a story that involves passage over a longer period of time. Simply mentioning that this event occurred in past adds that little bit of depth to your world building. Number 3, swear words and curses. So this one might be a little controversial because I know some people just say, use your modern swear words, just use them, everybody understands them. And you can, but that always to me is a little bit boring and a little bit crass, and it's just not as interesting. So I'm not saying you need to go and create your own entirely new language. Let's leave that for the Tolkiens of the world, thank you. But it does help if you just come up with something a little bit more creative. So by that I mean really easy ways to do it is to, just take a god's name, one of the names of the gods in your fantasy or science fiction novels or whatever higher power you have really, and pair it with something unconventional but relevant. For example, if you have a god of fire, you might use that god of fire's name followed by the word torches as a curse. And things like that, just to make some more creative phrases that will give your writing just a little bit more color. And as for swear words, if you want to go the route of making up swear words, again, you don't have to go too crazy with this, but I would advise maybe picking like one or two to add a little bit of interest to your writing. And swear words throughout history are usually generally based upon either death or adult acts. That's usually what they're based upon. So if you're trying to figure out how should I be creating a brand new swear word, just look at whatever pantheon or government structure you have created. Find within that whatever is related to death or to adult activities, and then just create a derivative word from it. And another piece of advice if you are creating your own swear word is to keep it short and punchy. You do not want it to be multiple syllables. That will just kind of kill it. You want it to be a single syllable, sharp, short word. If you do that, it will have the feel of a swear word. It will connect in your story the way a swear word connects in real life. And it will just add that little bit extra to your character's dialogue. Number 4, cuisine. So you're probably thinking, wait, I know exactly what they're going to eat and all that. And hold on a second. If you're thinking, oh, I'm just going to take all these recipes I like, you can. Okay, I'm not going to say you can't. But what I would suggest to really make your world feel more like a fantasy world is to figure out specifically what the options for food are. And I'm going to explain to you how I like to break it down to kind of give you an idea. So, what I like to do is I like to start by just deciding upon ingredients. And I break these into three categories. Common ingredients, which these are the things that anybody in any city or town can easily run out to their local farmer or grocer or general store or whatever you have that provides goods, and they can buy them at any time of the year, or at least the majority of the year, for a relatively low cost. Next up, you want to come up with a list of semi-common ingredients. So these are ones that your characters will be fairly familiar with, but they're more the once a season type of ingredients. They're the treat ingredients. These are the things that your characters will probably have 3 to 4 times a year that they'd be able to buy and stock in their pantries and use in their meals. So they would be familiar with them, but they wouldn't be part of their everyday eating habits. The third category is unusual ingredients. So these are the really, really rare ones. These are the food items that when your characters have them, it is a festival. It is the greatest day on earth. These are things that they get once a year, once every 2 years. These are not commonly part of everyday meals, and they're not even, commonly in the pantry for a short time like the semi-common ingredients. These are the items that are only ever broken out for the big occasions. So those are going to be your three category. You're obviously going to have more common ingredients than any of the other two, and you're going to have fewer unusual ingredients. And then the last thing I want you to do is come up with a list of seasonings that you're going to have available, because not all seasonings are available throughout all the world. And you can do as much research into what seasonings grow in what climate you like and use that as inspiration. The point is to come up with a list of seasonings that your characters would reasonably have in their pantry for the majority of the year in order to flavor their food. And then once you have this list of ingredients and seasonings, I want you to just go to Google and find a handful of recipes that use these ingredients and these ingredients alone. You might have to franken a few recipes together to make something that's actually viable, but I want you to go and do that. And then just write them down. Write down what the recipe is, write down real quick what the ingredients in it are. That way, when you are writing and your characters need to stop somewhere for a meal, you have a ready-made list of ones that you can pull from that will fit in with your world building. And if they're out shopping for supplies for traveling, you have ready-made list of ingredients that they will be able to buy, and a rough idea of how often they should run into this in the marketplace, as well as the price of it. This just adds a little bit more realism to your culture that you are building. Number 5, pop culture. I know the title probably sounds a little vague and confusing, but I will explain. By pop culture, I am talking about the things people do for fun, essentially. How do people entertain themselves in your world? And I would advise breaking it down into 3 categories broadly. You can do whatever works best for you, but I would advise creating a music category, a game category, and a literature category. You can do whatever you want within these categories. You don't even have to use these categories if you don't really want to. The purpose of this is, again, just to help flesh out the world a little bit more. For example, if you decide you want there to be music mentioned in your novel, then what you want to do is just come up with a list of instruments that would be played by your local culture. You could even come up with a list of instruments played by the culture of a neighboring country. That's up to you. But basically, just come up with a list of instruments that you want to exist in your world. They can be whatever you want. They don't have to have existed in the same place and time throughout history. It's a fantasy book. You can choose whatever instruments you want. That's perfectly fine. But just come up with a list of instruments. That way you're consistent throughout your novel. And also come up with some basic groups, whether it's what a traveling band would be composed of, whether it's what a full orchestra would be composed of. That's entirely up to you. This just allows you in your writing to add those little extra details that really make it feel more thought out. And if you want to go the extra mile, look into different styles of music and pick one, find a couple songs that you think really fits what would be played in your world and use those as a reference, but that's just to you. If you want to flesh out the literature in your world, then you need to think of things like how are books printed, how are they mass produced, how are they published. I know what writer wants to think of that in a fictional context when they already have to think of it in a real life context, but you do have to consider those things, as well as what genres are popular at the moment. How long are the majority of the books? Are they novellas by today's standards? Are they 1,000-page tomes? It's up to you. Also, is fiction more popular or is non-fiction more popular? Maybe what's getting passed around and read is more how-to guides than anything else. It's up to you which one you want to be the case. And then I also suggest for pop culture including games. These can be games kids play with toys, or these can just be like a card game or a board game. For example, in the Wheel of Time series, they have this game called Stones, which I think is completely made up. Correct me if I'm wrong. But the fact that we have characters who are constantly playing this game, it just adds that little bit level of interaction that's available and more understanding of the world and what it is. And to be honest, a lot of these things are actually featured in the Wheel of Time series, which is an amazing series. It has phenomenal world building and characters. So it's not like I'm talking out of my butt when I list off these things. Well-written books have all of these features in them. The reason I suggest you come up with all of these pop culture items is because they really open the way for character interaction. They really can give you insight into how characters are when they are having fun and letting loose. Are they really competitive? Do they happen to really like the arts? Do they happen to hate the arts? When they play a game, are they very strategic or are they very aggressive? It's all up to you. But by having all these items in your novel, you can really give your characters a lot more depth and really make your world feel much more well-rounded and realistic. That's all I have to say this time, but I hope it was helpful. I hope you guys liked it. If you did, please feel free to share your thoughts in the comments, leave a like, and maybe even subscribe. Thanks for watching.